Cathaoirligh. I move Amendment number 1, that Dáil Éireann resolves that the Education Admission to Schools Amendment Bill 2020 be deemed to be read a second time this day 12 months from now to allow for a review of the impact of the provision of Section 6210B of the Education Admissions to School Act 2018 to be undertaken, and for that then to be taken into account in the consideration of this bill. May I begin by saying, Ceann Comhairle, that I fully appreciate Deputy Smith and Deputy O'Riordan's intentions are well-meaning in bringing forward this bill, and I do not dispute that. However, the timing of this bill will have serious unintended consequences for schools who are currently undertaking their admissions processes for the 21-22 school year under the existing legislation. As you are aware, the Education Admissions to School Act 2018 was signed into law on the 18th of July 2018. The overall objective of the Act is to provide a new framework for school enrolment that is designed to ensure that every child is catered for and that the way in which schools decide on applications for admission is transparent. The measures provided for in the Act do make the admissions process transparent and consistent for all. The Act creates confidence for parents that the admission criteria laid down by schools and the procedures used by them are visible and legitimate. The legislation is part of a suite of measures taken to take greater account of the needs of parents and students in the school system. The Act provides for schools to explicitly state in the school's admission policy that it will not discriminate against an applicant for admission on the grounds of disability, special educational needs, sexual orientation, family status, membership of the traveller community, race, civil status, gender or religion, while including provision for single-sex schools and denominational schools to reflect in their admission policy the exemptions applicable to such schools under equality legislation. The Act also sets out certain criteria that schools cannot take into account when deciding on an application for admission, such as consideration of a student's academic ability, skills or aptitude, consideration of a parent's occupation, financial status, academic ability, skills or aptitude, apart from exceptions provided by the Act as a consideration for the offer of a place. On the 14th of January 2020, certain sections of the Act were commenced in order to be operational in time for the admission processes for the 2021-2022 school year. From February 2020, all recognised schools in Ireland were required to draft a new school admission policy in accordance with the Act's requirements. The Act was commended earlier this year to allow sufficient time for consultation with the patron, the staff of the school and parents of children attending school as required by the Act. These new admission policies, which have been approved by patrons, are now published on individual school websites. These policies will apply for admission to school for September 2021 and onwards. Schools have worked extremely hard in developing, consulting and drafting these new policies. The Act requires that any subsequent changes to a school's admission policy requires the consultation and patron approval process to be undertaken once again before the admission policy could be published by the school. Given that schools have just completed this process for admission to school next September, any changes required midstream would be hugely disruptive to schools during a time when they are operating under current challenges provided by COVID-19. The legislation put forward in this bill proposes to delete Section 6210B of the Education Admissions to School Act 2018. The section that the bill proposes to delete allows schools, and this is an important consideration, if they so desire, to take into account a student's connection to a school by virtue of a parent or grandparent having previously attended the school when deciding on an application for admissions to that school. This is subject to a limit of 25% on the number of available places that can be filled by a school using this criterion. Schools continue to have discretion in relation to their admission criteria and how they are applied once they are non-discriminatory and transparent. There is no evidence available at this time that indicates how widespread the provision that the bill before us is proposing to delete is being used by schools, or indeed that there are any difficulties posed for those seeking admission to schools where it is in use. Schools that are not oversubscribed must accept all applications. Rather than opposing this bill outright, the amendment I am seeking to move allows time to review the use of this admission criteria by schools so that an informed and considered view of this proposed legislation can take place, with knowledge of the use and the impact, if any, of this criteria on school admissions. Importantly, it also avoids disrupting and delaying the school's admissions processes for the years 2021-22, which are already underway in schools. I am also sure the Deputy would agree with me that schools and school leaders are working tirelessly at this time to lead our school communities through the challenges of COVID-19. And this timed amendment avoids unnecessarily adding to the workloads of schools at this time. This, I believe, is a reasonable approach given the challenges that schools are operating in at present. In conclusion, information regarding how many schools will choose to invoke this 25% provision and its impact or otherwise on school enrolment will only become apparent when it becomes operational in September 2021. This amendment seeks only to allow an opportunity to review the use of this admissions criteria so that an informed view of this proposed legislation can take place.